Good evening and welcome to the Caring View, the only online weekly social care chat show free for view on YouTube. Before we get started, just remember that all of views expressed tonight are the opinions of ourselves and of our companies, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, so you will be kept up to date with any show that we do in the future. We're always live on Tuesday at 7:30, but every now and then there is something so big and so monumentous that we need to discuss it. We try and slip an extra episode in, which and tonight we're starting with both our guests in with us for the pre-intro chat. So if you are an avid watcher, which I'm sure all of you are, we have got Jane Brightman, Director of Social Care.
I am.
Yeah, the IHSCM, and also founder of the Outstanding Managers Network. And we also have Sonia Rai, another regular guest of ours, who is the founder and director of Nectar HR. So, I missed Tuesday's episode. I do apologise, guys, that I couldn't be there with you. But I know there has been some really exciting things that we need to start on a positive, because this isn't going to be a super positive show. I think we can try and bring a positive spin on most things. But I just want to start and say, Dawn, 25 years in social care?
It is, exactly today. I was only reminded because I received an email that said, would I talk about my YT from 1996? So that's the only reason I remembered. So yeah, 25 years ago today, I started YT on £13.70 a week.
Wow.
And I did my MVQ1.
I think I was right.
I think you did that as well, Jane, didn't you?
I did. I think we started at about the same time, Dawn. Yeah, I've got my care level 1 and my care level 2.
Yeah, so I got my MVQ1 and I finished it in 9 months, and I was praised for finishing my MVQ1 in care. Yeah.
And still going strong in social care, still an advocate and a leading voice in ever brilliant Dawn. So
I'd never do anything else. So
and Mark, I see today Languston Award. What's this?
Yes, so I didn't actually know about it. Somebody messaged me and I was like, I don't actually know what you're talking about. So I had to email them yesterday, and I got confirmation today. So yes, so for the Rising Star Award. So I found out, I emailed them back and was like, do you know where because I never know where any of the nominations come from, which is really frustrating to then be able to thank the person. But it came from either one of the care home staff of the home I used to manage, a relative or a professional, but obviously I don't know who. So, but yes. And then we obviously have to talk about your award, Adam. Yes, I have no idea what it's actually called, but I know it's a big one. You have to remind us, or Dawn will jump in. But
no.
So it's the Silver Award for above and beyond contribution to social care. It's the one that was introduced at the beginning of this year. I say the beginning of this year. This year's been a bit of a black hole of time, so I don't even know what day it is at this moment in time. But it's the one that's presented by Chief Senior Social Care Nurse Deborah Sturdy. So yeah, completely like you, Mark, out of the blue, have no idea. I do know who nominated me. My fabulous colleagues at the ICS, that is in Lancashire and South Cumbria. So yeah, an absolutely huge honour, really, really grateful for it, but just happy that we can be here being voices for social care, doing what we do, hopefully bringing about change, not like some massive lists that are out there with people on who don't bring around change. And I will say that I'm getting to the point where I actually think we need to start thinking about real change in the sector now, and we need to stop thinking about profit. One of the things we're talking tonight about is reform. And one of the huge things about it is, if we're going to give the social care sector more money, are we going to ring fence it to prevent, extortionate profit margins? And that's one thing we'll see with people probably trying to clamour now for contracts with extra funding from this reform grant. And obviously, the other thing we're discussing tonight is mandating the vaccines. How did I forget that one? But Sonia, Jane, what's new since last you were here?
Jane, do you want to go first?
What's new? Well, we've had an announcement about social care, but actually it was an announcement about the NHS. So that's good. I don't know.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that's passive aggressive here.
Oh, I'm very passive aggressive. I don't know. I don't think anything's new for me. Sorry, boring.
No, I managed to catch you at the Care Workers Charity Chat the other day about the gender disparity within social care, and I managed to listen to some of it, and I think it's just the tip of an iceberg conversation, really, isn't it?
Totally.
So, what happened in that conversation? What were the main points that came from that?
So we were talking about the gender divide, particularly around kind of, social care being a very female dominated workforce, and how we can smash some glass ceilings and support our female co-workers a lot better. And you're right, Adam, tip of the iceberg conversation. And I'm chairing another one tomorrow for them, because of course it's Professional Care Workers Week all week. I'm chairing another one tomorrow, which is about how social care kind of comes out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We will come out of the COVID-19 pandemic one day.
Maybe this year, maybe 2050, but we will come out of it. There is hope. So, Sonia, what's new since the last time you were on? Because I think the last time you were on, it was another special episode we did, again, about the no jab, no jobs. I'm sure we'll get you on one day to talk about something other than mandates in the vacuum. I'm sure your expertise is so vast that we'll all benefit from it. But since the last time you were here, what's new?
Just keeping really busy with kind of employment issues. I think, COVID has presented HR professionals and employment professionals with so many strange, difficult scenarios that we're being asked to advise on, support on. And I think it's kind of like, there's no kind of background to any of it. We're kind of just winging it sometimes and like giving the best advice that we can. Obviously, yes, the government have gone into consultation about frontline NHS staff today, but there's also talk about the flu jab. So lots going on, and whenever I hear announcements like that, my mind just starts kind of going crazy about what does this mean and what clients that we've got that it's going to affect and things like that. So I think there's just a lot going on, and there's been some tribunals from kind of lockdown 1 that have now been going to court. So it's been really interesting to see what judgments have been made on them about people feeling safe at work, PPE, adjustments made by employers and things like that. So just a lot going on, even though we're not kind of in the thick of it with COVID anymore. It's more like the aftermath, or kind of like phase 2, I would say.
I don't know about not being in the thick of it with COVID at the minute. It doesn't. I know what you mean. I completely understand what you mean, and the world's ticking on, and things are opening up, and life's getting back to that sort of normality. But I can honestly say, first-hand experience at the moment within social care, it is still here. And for me, I think sometimes this idea that COVID's disappearing, especially from councils or other people that we rely on for contingencies, has had a detrimental effect. They've sort of gone, well, light at the end of the tunnel. Back in March, when they discontinued the Carers app, which had loads of resources onto people, and it was sort of like, right, well, pandemic's over, worst of it gone, don't need this app anymore, let's save some money. And actually, I know so many people at the moment who need it now more than ever. Not really because of COVID, but because they've got no staff, and their staff are burning out, and they're overworked, and they're exhausted, and they're shattered. And it's just, COVID might not be the biggest problem anymore, but the after effects of it are incredible.
I think that's what I mean by like kind of part 2 is and also what's coming next this winter. So already lots of talk about booster jabs, children getting vaccinated. So for me, it's not like where we were last year, where there was a lot of uncertainty about what do we do. And I think we started to process things like bubbles and who you can mix with and the changes. But now, although that there is some element of going back to normality, it's a very different normal. And COVID and the implications of COVID at work seem to drive a lot of things now and a lot of decisions.
And it must be so difficult for you, because I know from talking to my own HR, you're learning as you go with all of this. It's not like it's been ingrained in law for years. It's something like learning on the spot almost, and it must be so difficult for you.
Pretty much. I mean, sometimes announcements have been made and people don't always realise the employment impact that it has. So, for example, announcements around shielding and things like that, that affects the workforce effectively. So many people who, their staff have had to shield, and how do you do that, and how do you support that? And so many clients where, they are patient facing, or they've got residents and things like that. So it's not always easy to go, oh, they can just work from home or they can work remotely. It doesn't work like that in reality. So I do feel like we have had to really kind of think things through, and we are being asked to give advice in scenarios that we've never ever dealt with before, and they're very unique. And a lot of the time we're dealing with people's anxieties, and that makes it so much more harder because it becomes very emotional.
Yeah, and I know we've got a ton of questions for you tonight to ask about the vaccine, the mandating the vaccine. It's 6 days tomorrow. Everyone needs to have at least had the first jab of the course to be able to work in social care. But I really want to start by discussing the amazing news that we've got social care reform and what everybody thinks about it. So I know I was on GB News pretty much straight after it, praising how fantabulous the action. No, I'm joking. It's awful. There's nothing really good, in my opinion, to say about it. But everyone else, I mean, Jane, first impressions, what do you think?
Yeah, same as you, Adam. It's not an announcement for social care. My concern is that we are relying on the NHS to reduce waiting lists over the next 3 years, and it feels to me like that's the impossible task. And if in 3 years' time they haven't reduced waiting lists or haven't reduced them significantly enough, what are they going to turn around and say, well, we're still going to take that money off of you for social care? I don't think so. So I'm not holding my breath that social care is going to see much of it, really.
And it's this idea that, to fix social care, the thing you need to do is remove the waiting list and pump more people into the social care system. Yeah, that's really going to help when we've no staffing, no agencies, and people can't take packages on. So, Mark, brief outline. What are the main points that they announced on Tuesday? I love putting people on the spot.
If I can unmute myself, let's see. So it's an increase of national insurance of 1.25%. I have to be wary. I see a lot of people on social media saying it's not 1.25%, because actually when you have a look, it's 1.25%. So it's actually a 10% increase for our national insurance. Social care is to receive 5.4 billion over the next 3 years. Care costs will be capped at 86,000, but obviously that doesn't include accommodation and certain bits and pieces. So actually it's not going to help, and it doesn't come into effect till October 2023. So, people can still incur those costs from now until then. And it's estimated to raise 36 billion going forward. I mean, I think for me is they've missed the chance, haven't they, of doing the reform properly. And what I worry about most with it is, the frontline staff, the care workers, that some of them are on minimum wage, or not a very good wage if they're not on minimum wage. And actually now they're going to be hit with higher national insurance. It just doesn't make anybody want to join the sector. There's nothing in there for, the recruitment crisis, which the government can't say they didn't know about, because actually it's all over the media. It's on the front of the newspapers every day for the last couple of weeks. Yeah, I just think it was a very bad missed opportunity. And like Jane said, I think it's just going to head straight to the NHS. And yeah.
Well, I mean, even with what you just said, 36 billion's being raised, and we're getting what, 5.4? How is this a social care eve? Everyone was calling it social care eve, and it was like, this is. I mean, he even put a massive tweet out before here. I think it was 4 threads long, and not one mention of social care in the entire thing. It was all the NHS.
I think the annoying thing was that he stood there, didn't he, and thanked the NHS staff, and quite rightly so. They've done an amazing job, but said how professional they were, and gave them unlimited praise. But then there was nothing for social care, and I just wish for once somebody from government would just stand there during one of the press conferences and thank care workers for their hard work and actually being there and turning up every day.
I think the issue is social care is just still the Cinderella service. He opened up the social care reform with the NHS, and that was the most frustrating thing. His first, I think, 15 words were about how wonderful we need to protect the NHS. And I completely get that, because I'm on a waiting list and I've waited 20 months now, so I completely get that. But at the same time, you open up, there's a big banner across the bottom of BBC News, social care reform, blah, 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 blah. And he opens it up with the words, we need to protect the NHS. We need to do this for the NHS. And there was nothing mentioned in respect of the staff, except there was going to be a lovely new white paper, which I don't know how many of these we've seen. And it was just all based around what we needed to do in order to protect the NHS, to decrease waiting times, which I completely understand, like I've said. But I had ex-staff members, colleagues, friends, so many people contact me to say, I have no staff now. This isn't October 2023. I have no staff now. I don't have really good training. I can't train people properly. I don't have the resource to train people properly. I don't have this. I don't have that. And people, there was massive frustration, and that was just in Norfolk, let alone the rest of the country. And then I've had other people that have come back and said, "Oh, we'll wait and see, because this white paper might produce this or that." But there was nothing about the NHS crisis now was discussed, but not the social care crisis. And I think in order to label it as a social care reform, we should have been in there somewhere. You can't label something that way.
Exactly. And the fact that social care encompasses so many different services, especially home care, learning disabilities, sheltered accommodation, extra care housing, there needs to be a lengthy time to be discussing it. You know, we talked about the social care crisis and how the government must have known. They've been running the same campaign for the last 3 years. Every day is different, to try and get people into the sector. So they know there's no staff. They've been running this campaign, which probably wastes millions of pounds each year, because they run it for a week, no one puts any effort in with it, and then it disappears for another year. You know, it's absolutely bonkers. For me, there is a severe lack of understanding of any of the problems in social care. First and foremost, can I just ask anybody who sits in Parliament to grow the heck up and actually stop jeering and cheering and acting like blooming children when you're talking about stuff? I know it's funny, but at the end of the day, there were so many, honestly, but there were so many people watching that on Tuesday with such anticipation of what it meant to them, because they might not be here in 2 years' time. And just to hear them jibing at each other and trying to get one over on each other about something that is so incredibly meaningful to so many people, pathetic, absolutely pathetic. My biggest concern is this £100,000 floor that, you know, if you're going to have under £100,000 in assets and what have you, social services will contribute towards your care, because that just means so many people are going to go to local authority rates, and local authority rates do not meet the financial needs of providers. And I just fear that it's going to create a whole new crisis of its own of providers not being able to be viable. Sonia, what were your impressions? Did you watch it? Did you see any of it? Obviously not being heavily a part of social care, but one of our social care allies, I like to think. What were your impressions of it?
I mean, I think it looks like not enough investigation of the actual issues that are facing social care. So what you said is really true. Social care is massive. It's kind of like 2 words, social care, but there's so much that comes under that umbrella. And probably not enough real understanding of the real problems that are out there. I mean, I've been speaking to people who are just saying we've got no staff, people are leaving, all, you know, all the issues that you're talking about. And there's real problems there, and there's no real quick fixes. And so investment needs to be made into kind of how you tackle that and how you tackle it appropriately. And so that however many billion it is needs to be spent extremely wisely, because there's so many issues that need to be looked at. I'm not saying that there isn't in the NHS, because there is. You know, we've got NHS clients that are struggling in some ways with things like resource and things like that as well. It's difficult in lots of sectors at the moment. But with you see, the thing with social care is the service doesn't stop. So you can't just close the door and go, oh, we're not going to do this until tomorrow when somebody comes in. You have to keep it up all the time. So that really needs to be looked at in a lot more detail. And I think there needs to be a lot more, what I would say, proactivity around that, rather than kind of quick fixes. you need to really look at the skills gaps, the shortages, why they're there, and really make some serious investments.
Yeah, and that word skills is one of my favourite words when we talk about social care. Because, and I can't remember who I had this conversation with, and we were talking about the profession being skilled. And for me, if anyone says they can't do a job, they go, "Oh, I can't do what you do." That in turn makes the person who can do that job skilled. If there are people who are out there that can't do that job, it in turn makes the people who can do it skilled. And we need to just start recognising them as skilled. We could talk about reform for ages. I just want a couple of points from everyone. What are the one things that you would want to have in Tuesday's announcements? And then we can get on to the meeting part of tonight, which is trying to provide some people with a bit more guidance of what to do from November 11th. So I'll start with Mark.
Yes. What I'd like to see in the reform, I think, definitely involving people that use care services to get their opinions is a key, or it's not even key, it's a must. They must do that. And I think recognising the workforce, increasing their pay, they're going to have to give local authorities the budget to then cascade down to providers. I think the workforce, and people that use services is paramount, and listen to providers, but not just the big providers, the small ones that actually make up a large majority of the sector.
Yeah, I agree. Dawn.
I think
no swearing.
I think the thing is with me, you don't know what social care is until you either live it or you work in it. And I think there has been no consultation with either. He basically admitted that himself. It's all been, right, we'll fund it. We'll give you some money. We'll shut you up. Here you go, have 5.4 billion. And that's just going to cover the crater of the crisis at the moment. But nothing had been dictated in respect of the current crisis. It was, well, by this date, you'll have this. And by this date, you'll have this money. And then you'll have this funding. No, the sector needs it now. We need it now because we're in crisis now. When we were in lockdowns, we locked down to protect the NHS. That message was sent wide and clear. We had to protect the NHS at the time. Everybody did. People adhered to it. But at the same time, we need somebody to protect social care now, because I've got friends and colleagues that are turning down care packages, that are saying no to admissions, that are letting go of domiciliary services, that are turning away packages, that are having to call families and say, we can't do this anymore. I've even got a friend who has given notice to 4 people today because they're on a higher need, and she's basically had to rag rate everybody. And she said that is the worst thing she's ever had to do. And that crisis is now. It's not a year and a half, 2 years down the line. It's right now. And I would have liked to have heard about how they were going to help the here and now rather than a year or so down the line, because that's what we need now.
Yeah, action now. Jane.
Yeah, so agree with everything that's been said. Completely echo Dawn's point, the here and now. Something needs to be done urgently, and I really had hoped they'd address that, but they've completely ignored that. We're waiting for the winter plan. I think the winter plan is only going to be a review of current guidance, so I don't think we need to get our hopes up there's going to be anything helpful in the winter plan at all. So, basically care providers are on their own in the middle of a crisis. It's just ridiculous. And if I'm brutally honest, I'd like to see a shake-up of regulation. I don't think our current inspection and regulation system is fit for purpose anymore. And I think someone needs to review that. So I really had hoped that would be part of reform. Doesn't look like it will be.
We were really hoping we could discuss that on the show, but CPC turned us down. There we go. There we go. I mean, I completely agree with this regulation, because this month alone, I've had 2 PIRs, a Lancashire contracts compliance exercise, plus my CCG quality audits for the month. Why can't we just have one framework that everyone sings off? Shove everything into one framework that everyone can dip in and out of, save us all the time, because we do not have the time, especially during COVID, and help us that way. I mean, for me, I was hoping he was going to turn around and go, this 36 billion to social care, how awesome is that? But, it wasn't to be. I understand about inspecting the NHS and everything, but 30th person, social care employs more people, and yet they pay less. You know, the unfair care report, which I was hoping would have been mentioned, found that most of social care workers are paid, what, 7,500 less than their equal counterparts within the NHS. Where's the parity? So I was hoping at least the word ring fence was going to be announced in the funding, so that we knew it was going to go towards where it needed to go. And profit cap. I really wanted to hear profit cap. Not that I don't want, I don't want to put people out of business, but I think we do need to. And you've got CEOs and company managers that are on £2 million a year. I think we really need to sit back and go, is the funding really going to the right place? What do they do that deserves them to have £2 million and the rest of their staff earning £8.91? Yeah, but I don't know. It's like Vaughan said, like Mark said, like Paul said, they just don't listen to us. They sit there and think, well, we're going to do this. And the amount of people on social media who are going, well, great, social care is getting a load of money. Surely you must be happy. Well, no, because money does not a social system make. There needs to be planning about it. Sonia, I know I've come to you back again and gave us some very great insight onto what you thought in season. What would you think, or what did you expect anything different to the last on Tuesday?
I think a better understanding of the actual issues that are facing social care right now, but also some real planning around the support and how this money kind of needs to be spent in the right way. And for me, I think the lack of that is concerning, because there's no guarantee that the budget that's being allocated is actually going to be doing anything at all. Because you can have all the money in the world, but you're not going to spend it in the right way if you haven't got the right planning and the right understanding of the issues. Potentially, you're probably going to create more problems, and B, the problems that you've ignored are going to get bigger and bigger. And obviously, just with my HR hat on, I would have liked to have seen recognition about the resource side of things, and how difficult that is, and the impact that it's having on the services.
Yeah. See, maybe we should just try and create our own party and go and fix social care. No one else seems to know what they're doing. Well, let's just do it together. I suppose the only other thing that I was hoping to attain was that they were going to allocate a portion of money to buy a fabulous book called When I Grow Up, I Want to Be a Carer, and include it in the national curriculum all around the country. And I think they should do that. So if you are listening and you are watching, go and buy all the books. Go make some more of them and buy them as well. And let's get them in young schools and let's start young and trying to encourage people. So I'm going to hand over to Dawn and Mark, because I'm incredibly busy this week and haven't prepared much regarding the vaccine. I know Dawn and Mark have worked incredibly hard putting together some questions and collating some questions from the public and from other people as well. So I will actually be quiet for once. I'll mute myself and Dawn and Mark, so I'll take it away with some of the questions about mandating the vaccine.
Yes, Dawn, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so we've had loads and loads of responses. A lot of them were duplicates, so it seemed to us that many managers and providers were all really concerned about really similar things. So one of the questions was, why just care homes? Why not the NHS, bus drivers, teachers? We've been working with the virus for nearly 2 years. Sometimes no PPE. We have had COVID or been exposed and have natural immunity. And the people we work with are double vaccinated. This has never been explained.
I really don't have the answer for that one at all. I think this is government decision, government policy. To be honest with you, as a HR kind of expert, I guess, I was quite surprised about the line that they've gone down with this. Obviously, they're talking about the safety of residents and everything else, and I get that. But even I was surprised at the approach that's been taken. Obviously, they've gone into consultation today, and they're talking about frontline NHS staff as well, and they've also added the flu vaccination in there because of concerns about what's going to be happening this winter. So I think it isn't just social care. I think it's going to be, NHS healthcare as well. I think that's a case of watch this space, and we'll have to see what happens there. But it is it is something different for us because obviously in employment law applies to everybody. You know, if you've got a protected characteristic, you've got a protected character. It doesn't matter what industry you work in. So this is quite new for us as well. And it means a different set of rules. I mean, we've always worked with different regulations in health and social care because of things like CQC and being inspected and having to do kind of go above and beyond, really. You know, we've got our base employment law, then we've kind of got like best practice, and then we've got like the regulatory level that we have to go to. Now this just adds another layer on, and there is a lot of work around it, not just to get everything ready for November, but always after that point in terms of recruitment, contracts, all sorts of things. It's going to be quite a burden, I guess, on the system.
It'll be interesting that you talk about the flu jab. I wonder whether we'll have a flu jab passport as well as the vaccine passport to be able to evidence that, you know, we've had it.
I mean, obviously they're asking for evidence. You know, care homes will have to record evidence of employees having both jabs. So it will be interesting what they do about the flu vaccine as well. In the NHS, you know, staff are encouraged to have the flu vaccine, but they're not forced. And when I say forced, it's not a part of your employment contract. It's not a condition, but you are encouraged. So I guess we will have to see what they want to do about that and how they want to kind of create a process of evidence for employees to be able to prove that.
Yeah. Is the flu vaccine in the consultation? Because I know I've spoken to managers today, and it's now on the capacity tracker that care homes and home care have to fill in. So it's almost like they might have already jumped the gun and decided it.
I think it's part of the consultation that they've just announced, is my understanding.
Yeah, that's interesting, because obviously if care homes are now expected to report on it, it's almost like they've made up their mind.
Yeah.
One question that we got asked, which was a big duplicated question, is there's a lot of staff that might have seen people have reactions or are worried that they might have a reaction from the first vaccine. If they do have a reaction and they don't want the second one, where does that leave them in terms of, obviously, under the guidance?
So first of all, I think if they do have a reaction, they need to obtain medical advice and follow medical advice about having a second vaccine, and if they are able to have a second vaccine. And it's always important to remember that all of these situations are really, really unique. So the advice that I'm trying to give now is very, very general. But if you've got something similar like this going on, it's probably best to talk to your HR team or your employment lawyer or somebody to get advice for the exact scenario that you're facing. But my understanding is if you have an adverse reaction, you need to get some medical advice about obtaining your second vaccination. And if it's safe for you to do that, you may well go down an exemption route potentially, which puts you in a different box. But if you don't go down the exemption route and you choose not to take the second vaccine because of your reaction to the first, essentially the guidance is very, very clear. It's going to be unlawful if you haven't had both doses of the vaccine, or what they are calling a completed course of the approved vaccine by the 11th of November. So it very much puts you in a position of if you've never had the vaccine at all.
Yeah, thank you. Am I right in thinking the exemption list hasn't even come out yet?
No, it hasn't. I checked today.
Yeah.
There's no exemption list yet.
I was going to say, unless I missed it, but I knew it hadn't at the weekend. But yeah, which is even more insane, isn't it? You know, 6 days to go, and actually staff don't know whether they're exempt or not. But
well, somebody who I was talking to a few days ago apparently got told, well, if you're exempt, your GP will be able to deem you exempt.
Yeah. See, I know that on the Facebook groups, especially on yours, Jane, I've seen people saying that they've gone to their GP, the GP can't. They haven't been given the list either. So, yeah, I know Essex County Council put a statement out on their COVID thing. I think I shared it with you, Adam and Dawn, saying that they're looking at the records that they had from GPs, nobody would be exempt. So there obviously is talk about what the exemption list includes, but yeah, what for the general population, nobody else knows. But
And that's really important if you're an employer and you're planning, because I've made a list of kind of like what you need to do, and one of it is assess who has to be vaccinated, so you know who you're talking to about and what kind of conversation you're having with them essentially. So I think that I'm not aware of how, if the Green Book has been updated or not. I know that it's going to be in the Green Book, but it's concerning if it's such a tight timeline as it is, and like you said, it's not long before they have to have had the first dose. So that is a concern.
So I've just got a question. I know we've got a list of questions here, but it links into what you just said then, Sonia. So we really don't have much time. We have got 6 days, right? And one of my biggest fears is, because, and Jane will back me up on this, there are people in the groups that are seeing carers being sacked already, right? And we're all trying to explain to people, no, you must keep them until November 11th because they're fit and able to come to work. They want to come to work, so they've got the right to come to work, yada, yada, yada. Let's say we serve people notice and then they do a U-turn towards, I don't know, end of October. And you've got people who've been with you 8 years, so you have to, effectively give them whatever 8 weeks notice or whatever the legal requirement is. How are we then, how easy is it for it to be able to rescind these notices? And then similarly, if someone, let's say they don't reverse it, and on the 30th of September, I think this is a question actually coming up, so I might not know, I won't answer this one because there is a question there, but what do we do? How easy is it to rescind our notice to people if we've given them notice?
So there is something called a heat of the moment resignation, which is where you might, something happens at work and in the heat of the moment an employee resigns, and that's usually like a very short time period where they can come back and they can say to their employer, look, I think I made a mistake, or the employer approaches the employee and says, are you sure you want to hand your resignation in? I've done a video on it, I think last month, about heat of the moment resignations. So that in itself is its own kind of scenario. In this case, I think it's about keeping the conversations open. So I would have concerns if right now employers are already dismissing staff, essentially when we've still got some time. I don't think that would be deemed as a fair process, because if they're relying on this legislation, there's an opportunity to say, well, it hasn't actually technically really come into force just yet. So I would have concerns about that. I would keep the conversations open. Even if somebody resigned, I would want to be talking to them and making sure that they're making an informed decision. And if they did change their mind, I think as an employer, you would have to take that on board. And with the recruitment crisis and all the issues with resource right now, do you really want to be losing valued, skilled staff? So what I would suggest is, in that scenario, like I said, every scenario is different, but if you got to a point where they've missed the point for the first vaccine, so there's going to be a period where they haven't got their second vaccine, and you've come to the 11th of November, you may want to agree with that staff member some period of leave, whether it's paid or it's unpaid, and agree what you're going to do in that time period until they've had the second vaccine and completed that dose.
Okay.
We've had a question come in from Dean. I've just popped it on the screen. Is anyone aware whether there's any plans for such mandates to be brought in across the devolved nations? I mean, I personally don't know of any plans. Don't know if any of you guys do.
No, not at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Basically, you just got to move house, haven't you? Go up north. Or
Do you know what? It's really annoying, the fact that we only get 5.4 billion for social care. That's still going to be fed into the devolved nations, and they don't have the vaccine mandated. I honestly want Scotland to bring Hadrian's Wall down just below Lancashire, and I'll be happy then. But we don't get the £500 bonus for our staff. We get the vaccine mandated. We don't get much from the reform. Sucks to be in England, doesn't it?
We've got better weather, though. We have got better weather. Jane, have you got any questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on the point that you were talking about, where staff think they might be exempt, but we haven't got the list and we don't know. Is there any advice, Sonia, for what employers should do in that scenario? So a member of staff is saying, I'm definitely exempt. I can't prove it at the moment because the list isn't out. What could an employer do over the next 6 days and then that period between?
Talk to the staff member, record the conversations that you're having. So note it down, make sure you've got full understanding, because sometimes you can come out of a meeting and one person thinks one thing was said and the other person thinks something completely different. So check for understanding, make a copy of notes from that meeting, send them to the staff member, make sure that they understand the next stage. And I think that would be regular discussions really with that staff member until it is clear which category they are sitting in. You know, you might want to take some advice from your occupational health provider if you have one at that stage, if they've got any advice for you. But we might go past the 6 days and then it turns out that they're not medically exempt and they do in fact need to have the vaccine. In which case you need to agree a plan of action with that staff member in terms of are they going to have the vaccine? And if they are, like I said, it leaves this window where we hit November the 11th and they haven't had the second dose. So then a decision really needs to be made with that staff member about what's going to happen in that time period. I would suggest some form of leave, whether it's paid leave or unpaid leave. You know, you might use annual leave, but various things that you could do at that time.
So one of the other questions we had, obviously we're trying to attract people into the sector and into social care. So another duplicate question was, where does managers stand with apprentices who are only going to be offered one dose because of their age, because they're under 18? So how can we attract people in when there's this huge stipulation that there's got to be 2 vaccines?
Under 18s are exempt, so I've checked the guidance, and under 18s are clearly noted as being exempt. So obviously, if you're between 16 and 17, you may be offered 1 dose of the vaccine, which I think it would be very sensible to record that on file. And then as they're approaching 18, I guess it's having those conversations at that time about them having the second vaccination, because they then fall into the other category.
Okay, super. Go on, Mark. No, you're right.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I just had somebody message me that's watching, just saying that they had a staff member that went to their local GP and asked if they could give an exemption, and the GP advised that it was the person's choice not to have it, and they refused to put anything in writing. So obviously that's some of the direction that's coming from GPs here.
Yeah, I think unless you're medically exempt, you know, if it's your own beliefs of not having the vaccine, then I don't think GPs won't provide that for you. Yeah.
So what will happen, do you think, Sonia, if care homes continue to allow non-vaccinated staff to work after the date in November? Because obviously, surely the CQC can't mass shut down loads of care homes in one particular area if everybody started rebelling.
I mean, I looked into this, and I think the stance would be it's going to be unlawful from the 11th of November. If you fit into that category and you are not double vaccinated, it's going to be essentially unlawful for you to be on the premises, isn't it? So I think employers really need to make a very sensible decision and approach it very, very sensibly about what they're going to do there, because there may well be some serious repercussions for employers, because you may have a group, you know, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but you might have a group of staff that said, look, we didn't want to have the vaccine, but we've had it. You know, we've done what we needed to do by the 11th of November, even though it wasn't really, you know, it wasn't really my first choice, or I wanted to wait, or whatever the reason might be. And then, you know, you're still allowing people to come on site and you know, I now don't feel safe because they're not double vaccinated. So you might get all sorts of, you know, you've got health and safety issues there. We've got lots more to think about. So I think that would be a huge can of worms. And I would really advise employers not to go down that route and take a really sensible approach to it.
I mean, there's a lot of conversation at the moment of why don't we in social care just not strike? I think there was a post in your group, Jane, wasn't there, today or yesterday? And, you know, I completely agree we're going to have to think of health and safety aspects and everything like this. But, you know, let's just imagine if no one sacked anyone on November 11th. We just didn't sack anybody. And every single care home in the country just actually went, you know what? No, we're not going to listen to you. We're not going to do what the junior doctors did and postpone operations and treatments and stuff and stand outside the hospital with placards. We're still going to go in and do the work we're supposed to be doing. We're just not going to sack anybody. And for me, that's the only way the social care system would evolve. We've not got a union, wouldn't be able to orchestrate it. It would be very difficult. So yeah, there would be, like you say, Sonia, a huge kind of worms that would be opened up on that. I think one angle, though, on this that we've not really heard spoken about is we see our care home as whoever lives there, we see it as their home. So they can choose the colour of their walls, they can choose the bedding, they can choose which room they want to live in, they choose what's on the menu, they choose pretty much all aspects of their home. But this is actually imposing something on their home without their choice. So where would this leave us now in social care when we're trying to promote person dignity people? And actually, though, we're really sorry, though, because where you're living in the moment of the law that you can't find it, you can no longer choose to have someone care for you based on their vaccine status. I struggle with it all. I really, really do.
I think the one thing I struggle with is that, and I've seen this on care worker forums, is that they've said they're not having the vaccine for whatever reason, and that's their right. But they've already had authorization from their managers that they can come back and visit as a friend of the resident. So what's the difference? Like, you work in the home or they're going to come back. And some of them are now saying that the resident doesn't have anybody. They've known them for like 30 odd years. And actually they're going to apply for essential caregiver status. And, they do obviously have some relatives that don't visit, and the relatives are happy for that to happen. And yeah, to me, that just blows my mind. Like, what is the difference between working in a home or visiting, But
I think we'll see some really unique scenarios like that. And I think that is a decision for individual care homes to take as well, because some care homes may not want to allow that for various reasons, and some care homes may want to allow that. So I think we'll see some really unique scenarios presenting themselves, as we still are with just generally with COVID in workplaces. But we'll have to see what risks that might pose going forward. There's always going to be some kind of a loophole, isn't there, with any kind of legislation, and it may be that people find different ways of doing things, but essentially from an employment perspective, that employee and employer relationship will no longer exist. So I think then it's up to the individual care home to make that decision about what they want to do going forward.
Yeah. Jane, have you got any other questions that you can think of? And then we'll go back to the list that came in.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the care manager who doesn't have a human resources function behind them. They haven't got anybody kind of giving them employment.
I'm Sonia.
Yeah, I'm Sonia, exactly. But what would be your kind of take a deep breath? Here's some kind of wins. Here's some top tips to think about for those managers.
So I've done some videos, and they're on my LinkedIn. They're on all of our social media. So they're on. I don't know if they're on Twitter, because I don't think we could upload videos onto Twitter. But they're on Instagram. They're on LinkedIn. So go and have a look at those videos, and also the previous Caring View discussions that I've been on. I've tried to really outline very clearly things that you need to be thinking about, like recruitment, employee privacy notices, contracts of employment, how to approach consultations. We've tried to really give out as much useful information and guidance as best as we can, like generic, so that people can, it's not particularly for a particular scenario, but generally kind of sensible advice. But obviously, yes, give us a call, go onto our website, contact us. We'd be more than happy to support. We do some pro bono work as well. So we do some free work for organisations that are really struggling and they just need a little bit of support. So if it was that kind of a scenario, then we would try and support them that way as well. But what I would say is, yes, take a deep breath. When a lot of employment decisions and a lot of scenarios that go to tribunals and things like that, is there's always this case of reasonableness. What was the reasonable approach from the employer or the employee? So always try and take a step back don't make a decision in haste, and don't just be too, because sometimes people can have a very fixed view of this person said this and this, this is the end outcome that I want. So take a step back from that. Perhaps don't make a decision in haste, but always, just try and talk to employees, help them to make an informed decision. Make sure you understand the barriers for that individual employee. And I've said it before, consult with your staff appropriately and make sure you're not just having one conversation. If they've got barriers, you might need to have 3 or 4 conversations, and it evolves. And new things are coming out about COVID every day. I've spoken to lots of people who didn't want the vaccine earlier in the year that are now having it. And so, sometimes people just want a bit of time to make those choices as well. So just try and take a really sensible approach. But we've put a lot of free resource out there as well to try and guide people about what they need to be thinking about, or some sensible steps that they need to take.
So one of the other questions, Sonia, was about a staff member that had her first jab and then tested positive, so will now miss the November deadline. So what happens now? Is there a risk assessment? What can be put in place?
Essentially, the risk assessment is only for those who are medically exempt. That's what it says. So what I would say is, where I've talked about where people have changed their minds and you've got this period, I would be speaking to that staff member about, look, we know this is coming up. Let's plan for it in advance. What can we do? You might just want to offer them, if it's a case of a week or 2 paid leave, just to be supporting that staff member. You might ask them to use some annual leave. You might use some form of unpaid leave. Speak to them about how you do that. But I would never make a rash decision, and I certainly is that no basis for a dismissal, because that's something that's completely outside of that employee's control, and that to me would be deemed as a very unfair process. So and also not what you want to do when you need your staff and you want to keep your skilled workforce. So I would be looking at some form of leave in that scenario, and having a conversation with the employee, seeing what they feel, seeing what they think is appropriate.
So would there be no sort of legal requirement for the employer to pay? Just, thinking on the employee. So let's say I'm the employee and I've had my job because I need to make sure that I can work within social care, and then I go and get COVID and I've got it while I'm working from the care home that I'm working in. So I can't then have my second job, but I'm willing and ready to come to work, and my plan is to actually work after November the 11th, but I can't actually physically come into work now through no fault of my own. Should it be down to the employee to use that holiday? Should it be down to the employer to say, yes, we're going to financially compensate? Is there anything concrete that we need to be knowing about now, just so we can prepare? No,
there isn't. And again, these conversations were coming up a lot last year, when so other COVID related scenarios, so people are going abroad and then all of a sudden that country turns red and they're stuck out there, or they're coming back and they then have to isolate through no fault of their own. So there isn't necessarily any kind of legislation out there that says you have to give it as paid leave. But employees, I would always offer them, if they want to take that as annual leave. Or you might say, well, if it's a case of like 4 or 5 days, you might want to just increase their annual leave and say, look, we want you to take this as annual leave. We'll increase it so you're not losing out. Sometimes you might want to look at an option of unpaid leave. But if, for example, if there was some administration or some other work that person could be doing, perhaps they're really behind on some kind of paperwork or something else that's a big part of the role, or something else where the employer could redeploy and they could work from home for a week or 2, they might want to look at that as a sensible option. And you've got enough time now to be planning for that, to make sure the person's got the right equipment and everything else. And so just being flexible with that staff member. So just exploring different options really, and looking at what's fair for the employer and the organisation, because that is something that's come about by no fault of the employer or the employee.
So one question we had that came up a lot was around people's human rights and their basic rights. Now, I know what government have said and what public health has said, but I thought it'd be interesting just to raise from a HR perspective, put my teeth back in. So how does this affect people's basic rights?
So I think that's a question that is very difficult to answer, because I think we're going to see some interesting cases at tribunal going forward from this. So potentially what I say right now, because of, you know, it's going to be unlawful after X date, after the 11th of November, might not be what comes out of an employment tribunal, or what something goes to an appeal. So I think that there is no right or wrong answer at the moment about this, but certainly religious beliefs are not covered under this. So in terms of the Equality Act, and using your religious beliefs as a protected characteristic wouldn't count in this case. And somebody I spoke to earlier this week had an interesting viewpoint on it. So what they said was, it's not people aren't being forced to take the vaccine. It's not like if you don't take the vaccine, you will go to prison, you know, or that there is some kind of dire consequence. But then at the same time, if you are losing your livelihood, that is also potentially a dire consequence. So I think the government will take the stance that they're not forcing anybody. They're asking everyone to do the right thing, make an informed decision. And I think it will be interesting to see how it progresses. You know, we might be sat here in 6-12 months' time talking about some interesting cases that go to tribunal. But I think the cases that we will see that will favour in the employee's side will be where care homes haven't acted fairly to dismiss. That is my biggest concern, that people are dismissing too early, dismissing without following a real process. And you see, then it doesn't matter about the vaccine, if they wanted it or if they didn't want it, or about the legislation. What will matter is they didn't follow a fair process. And that, for me, you know, I've kind of, like, I harp on about it all the time, is really the biggest risk here. If you don't do this properly, and it's not just about dismissing, it's about, you know, you're now holding sensitive data on your employees. Have you updated your privacy notices? Have you told your employees? Have you communicated that? Have you looked at your recruitment processes going forward? Are you actually actively encouraging people to be able to take the vaccine? So are you giving them, and again, you don't have to do this, but are you going to give them paid time off to go and have the vaccine? And some people are actually thinking about, like, vaccination leave, so kind of 2 days off paid after you've had the vaccine. And as it's seen as, again, as something that would be encouraging, and, you know, kind of changing the culture of that care home as well. So there's so much to think about, but I think a lot of people think, I haven't got time for this. I don't think they see the risk element, perhaps somebody as much as I would see it, because I know employment and I know the cost attached to things like this, if you do it wrong and you end up at tribunal, could actually be massive for some really smaller care homes, and they'd be probably better off investing a little bit now, financially doing it all properly, rather than putting themselves at massive risk later down the line.
Yeah, I think documentation's key. 'Cause when you said about encouraging staff, straight away I thought, well, there's going to be some staff that then use that and flip it around on its head and be like, they bribed me. So yeah.
But I mean, I think as long as you're not kind of, it depends, you know, what you would see as a bribe, but as long as you're consistent and you're like that with everybody.
Yeah.
So, you know, what I would say is, if you're going to offer paid vaccination leave, you don't just offer it to the people that were a bit hesitant about having the vaccine, or you offer it to everybody. And if they've already had the vaccine, then you you update payroll accordingly, and you make sure that they got that time back in some way, so that you're being fair and consistent to everybody, and you're not singling anybody out and treating them differently, is what I would say. Because then it can't be seen as a bribe, because you'll be fair and consistent with everybody. But I would only say that about something like paid vaccination leave. I'm not talking about Selfridges vouchers or something like that.
Jane, do you have any other questions that you can think of?
I was just thinking about what you were saying there, and do you think there's any, because we know that there's care providers, some of the bigger chains have been kind of, they've made it a condition of employment quite early on actually, and have been sacking people, who haven't had the vaccine. Do you think there is potential for comeback on some of those employers in the future?
It really does depend on the scenario and the individual case. I think if for me, the way that we work and the way we work at Nectar is we will always try and work through barriers that an employee has. So, when we've done consultations in the past where perhaps a client of ours is changing terms and conditions, and people say have to work longer, or now they have to work Saturdays or various things, we'll really try to get to grips with that particular employee about what's going on, and we will really leave it to a certain point. We wouldn't make the decision too early. Yes, it will need to be made a condition of employment. So I made some notes, and one of the things I've put down is make it clear to your potential recruits that they will need to have both doses of the vaccine. If you don't already, as an employer, any employer, regardless of if care home or not, you should always make conditional offers of employment, and those conditions should be fair. So things like references, potential DBS checks, right to work checks, those kind of things, because if they're not satisfied, you have a fair way to then withdraw the offer. This now needs to be added as a condition into future employment, and it should be included in contracts of employment going forward as well. So I think there are various things that you need to think about, but hopefully all care homes make conditional offers of employment, because there are, various things that you need to be seeing before, like DBS checks and things like that. And that's not to say that if something came up on a DBS check that you don't employ somebody, you do a risk assessment and you take it on an individual basis. But yes, it needs to be added into that. I think people that are making the decision too early need to be mindful, and it will be really interesting to see if they followed the right process, because there is also, I don't want to bore you with employment law, but there are certain rights that you obtain after 2 years of employment with your employer, and there are certain rights that you don't have before that. So I think that, I've heard some employers kind of say it doesn't matter, they haven't even got 2 years service. But again, you have to be really, really mindful, because there's all sorts of sections of the Employment Rights Act that we haven't heard of ever before that are kind of coming out in tribunals now, and they're all COVID related. So you need to be really, really careful, and you can't just think, oh, they haven't got 2 years service, it'll be fine. You should still be fair, you should be consistent, and you should be fair to your employees.
2 years service reminds me of a company I once worked for. That's what I used to harp on about all the time. Sonia, you touched on the recruitment process. I've got one other question that I've just thought about, but coming back to the recruitment process. So and I've seen this quite often recently, if somebody inquires about a job and then the employer is asking them about whether they've had the vaccine or not, and then they're not processing them to the interview stage, there have been people reporting saying that the staff or the person making the inquiry into the role has then been like, well, you shouldn't be dismissing me from the process because actually it's not a condition of employment as of yet. It doesn't come in until November. What would your advice be there?
So my advice would be, it's about how you ask the question. So it might not be, have you had the vaccine? It should be, have you had the vaccine? I think we talked about this on the last show. Have you had the vaccine? Are you planning to have the vaccine? Are you not going to have the vaccine? I think these are definitely questions that should be asked, because that deadline is looming, and we'll be into November before we know it. So I think it's sensible to ask. But also, just from another perspective, if you are advertising a vacancy, you're holding information about those applicants. So you need to let them know that you're holding that information. So our care homes, my question would be, have you got applicant privacy notices in place, so people know that you're holding their data, what kind of data you're holding and how long you're holding it for? So the reason for that is twofold: A, to cover you from GDPR, but also if there was some kind of a claim that came through, you might have deleted that information 2 weeks later thinking, oh, we've discounted that person from the recruitment process. But actually we would tell you that you need to keep candidate information for up to 6 months in some cases, because of tribunal claims that may come from the recruitment process. So again, as an employer and as a care home, running a care home, you need to be thinking about these things. I don't think it's wrong to ask the question. I think there's different kinds of questions that need to be asked, and potentially a conversation to confirm what the applicant has said as well. So if they're saying, I'm thinking about having it, a conversation with them before you just discount them from the recruitment process. But you do also have the other side where it's going to be unlawful after this time period, and that has to be taken into account.
So my last question, and then I'll be quiet, is I attended a public health meeting, and somebody posed a question on there about if a staff member, and I think it was more aimed at live-in staff, but might have had the vaccine in India, in Russia, whether or not the Department of Health would see that as a eligible vaccine here, and they were told that no, the person has to have had both jabs in the United Kingdom for it to obviously be eligible under the guidance and the law. So what would your advice be there? If you've got somebody that's been double jabbed, say in India, they're already in work for you, or they've started working for you, they obviously can't have another jab. What would your advice be there?
I think that's going to be a really unique scenario. So I think it would be, I would want it in writing that is not going to be deemed as, I was just looking at the legislation here, a completed course of doses of the vaccine, and I would obtain that in writing first to make sure that you are comfortable, rather than just kind of hearsay, making sure that you've got that in writing, that is not, but also trying to get some advice about potentially, and I mean medical advice for that employee, for them to go away and get some medical advice about what they could potentially do in that scenario. But first of all, I think I would want written confirmation of that. There has been talk this week about the vaccine passports and things like that, and people that have had vaccinations in other countries, and if that will be accepted. So I think it's an ongoing conversation, is my understanding at the moment, and I think that it will have to be a case of, I'm not trying not to answer the question, but I think there's probably going to be a lot more information that comes with all of this, and I think this will be really evolving scenarios. So I think I'd want to see what's going on at the time and then advise appropriately, and really I'd want it in writing properly that isn't a completed course of doses.
And it's an answer we're going to need soon, because the number of providers applying for sponsorship licenses at the moment to bring workers in from abroad is, I know more than I can count on my hands in our local area that are trying it. I've even considered it. And then that I'd be thought of, so when they come into this country, the vaccine actually doesn't stand, and they've got to wait before they actually can then start when they get here. I never even thought about Mark, so I'd be really interested to see how that.
Yeah, and I think that's why the question was posed, because it was a provider that was bringing staff in from overseas, but.
Yeah, and even sponsorship licenses. We support our clients with obtaining sponsorship licenses and doing all the visas. It's not cheap. It can be quite a costly process, and there's a lot of form filling, and it can take some time to process visas, especially if they're not on a certain coding list and all sorts of other stuff. And I had a bit of a nightmare one that I did last year, and everyone at the Home Office was kind of working remotely, and it was taking a really long time just to even show up on their system. So I think you need to be mindful of the backlogs there and things like that as well, because there are backlogs.
I thought you were doing Piers Morgan then, Mark. I thought you were playing up
No, I plugged in my laptop at the beginning, and it was like, battery low. I was like, what? It's plugged in, but I hadn't switched over the wall. Yeah, outraged that you can't have a vaccine in Russia or wherever, and then atrocious.
As always, Sonia, a fountain of knowledge, an absolute support to so many people.
Very much.
I'm sure we'll be having you back very shortly, as soon as there's another consultation. But if there's any other HR issues that people have regarding social care, regarding employment, no matter what sector you're in, give them to us, because I'm sure Sonia would love to come here and talk about anything other than COVID. I know us care providers can't wait to talk about anything other than COVID.
It would be nice. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. We're supporting a lot with events and things like that at the moment. A lot of them around the vaccine, but various other things that we like to talk about that hopefully aren't too COVID related. And like I said, we like to offer really insightful, informative advice. And so I'm happy to do like short videos and things like that as well, just because it's about educating, and a lot of people, I think, when it comes to employment, they get quite scared and they kind of think, oh, I don't know anything about it, and so some people just kind of try to ignore it and hope it goes away, and that's not the best thing to do. There's lots of resources out there, but yeah, I'd be more than happy to come back and be in the hot seat again.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sonia. And Jane, Social Care Innovators are literally filling up at the moment. So many more people joining. So I'm sure we're going to have you on plenty of times in the future with all your 1,500 subgroups going on. Do you want to give us a quick update before we disappear?
Yeah, quick update. So we had a recruitment meeting today, which was really interesting, and I've got a page of notes that I'm going to be emailing around afterwards. Lots of kind of action-based stuff. So I think the group just felt, let's just get on with this now, and we're not going to get anything from the government, so let's just get on with it. We had a really great presentation from Olivia from Leicester, and she gave us some great top tips and showed us the video that they've produced in Leicester, which knocks the socks off of the Department of Health stuff, I have to say. Really,
it's a cracking video.
It's amazing.
Absolutely cracking. Yeah, so I think we've got some work to do, but we've got some ideas, and let's get on with it. I promise my dog won't join next time that I do.
No, I'm all for it. It's like Dr. Doolittle. Jane's got a dog. Sonia's just whacking a fly out of the way.
Sorry, I'm on mute. There was a big daddy long leg and it just kind of I was like, sorry.
Oh, right. Well, next week. What have we got next week? Dawn, who have we got next week?
We have Jane Connery from the Care Campaign for the Vulnerable coming to talk to us about fair eviction and also about safety monitoring in care homes. So she is coming to see us next week.
And no doubt the conversation on that is going to be very two-sided, because everyone's been locked out of care homes the last sort of 20 months. So I think there's been a huge demand for wanting to know what's going on the inside, and whether there is a need for CCTV monitoring in homes. I know it's on the Care Quality Commission's PIR return, just done one, so I know it's there. So definitely going to be an interesting week next week. Mark, do you want to close us out?
Yes, can do. Well, Sonia, Jane, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And Adam. Oh, go on. What were you going to say, sorry?
I was just saying thank you.
Oh. Dawn, Adam, any closing remarks at all?
Oh, is it Tuesday yet?
Yeah, it's only Tuesday of next week.
As long as I know. Oh, fingers crossed. Dawn and I might actually be meeting next week.
Yes.
For those who don't know, Mark, Dawn and I still have never met, ever. But it's the Care Expo in Birmingham next week. All being well, I will try and be there. So may get to actually meet the fabulous Dawn.
We can have a hot chocolate.
With a rum in it.
I'm going to be there too.
Oh,
I'm going to bring muffins.
I'm feeling a bit left out right now. I'm just going to put it out there.
Tickets are free. Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
We could all meet. Mark can't come though, can you, Mark?
No, I'm
Mark's got a proper job that keeps him busy now.
Keeps me out of mischief. I'm running around the NEC if not. So yeah, no. I love the Care Show. I think it's a great place to grab information, network with people. So you'll have a whale of a time.
Wonderful. Right. Well, I can't believe we've hit an hour and a quarter now. I have to do some quick math in my head then. I was working on 100 instead of 60. So yeah, I can't believe we've hit an hour and a quarter. So I do apologise for anyone watching this on catch up now, thinking, oh gosh, this is still going on. But join us up next week when we are talking about the Care Campaign for the Vulnerable, CCTV monitoring care homes, etc., etc. Until then, thank you very much for joining us, everyone.
Bye.
See you later.
Thank you again for joining us tonight on The Caring View. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and whilst you're here, check out some of the other videos that we've got up online. If you've got something that you think may be interesting for us to discuss, or if you want to guest spot with us, then drop us an email to thecaringview@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter, find us on Facebook. All the information is down there in the description box. But until then, have a good evening, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.